Good Friday always strikes me as the strangest of names. And the reason historically that the English call today Good Friday is because we think something holy happened, that holy sense of good. It was even thought that maybe it was called God's Friday, just as we used to wish people God be with you, and we now just say goodbye. This day somehow is so good, so holy, that it's God's. But I hear the story, I read the story, and good is just not the word I want to use. It reminds me of how we often say to each other after someone dies, they had a good death. And we know what we mean by that. It's the comfort of a life well lived in quality, if not quantity of years. Loved ones gathered around, a release from pain and suffering, a celebratory send-off. But these are the words for afterwards. In the waiting for death, we have the grief of our impending separation. Lost futures, lost love, lost companionship. For death is a journey that we must each make alone. Death does us part. We know this all too well at the moment. With retrospect, we can look to the Friday of Christ's death and we will call that good. We will talk about a life lived so well that it defied death, defeated it, it made it good. But that is Sunday's job. Today we are reminded that Jesus' death is torturous and humiliating and lonely. A death where all that could be good about it has been taken away. Those who love him are afraid and vulnerable to the same threat of arrest and death. Those who would be with him and give the world to be close to him, the women who would minister to him in his final hours, they are kept away at a distance. And it all occurs in this place that is separate from the city, a place away, called the place of the skull, an unclean place, outside of the city walls, away from all that has been declared holy. And it's a slow death as he struggles to gasp for his final breaths. Today we stay and we pray in the place that is full of grief and loneliness. There is in the background the betrayal of Judas, and then that of Peter, and then the handing over of Jesus by the priests to Pilate, and Pilate's handing over of Jesus to death. It's always that same word that's used: betray, hand over, betray, hand over, betray, hand over. One by one, all leave him, all betray him, all hand him over, until he is truly alone, until the body of Jesus is handed over one last time to a man called Joseph of Arimathea and hastily placed in a tomb without ceremony or ritual. Perhaps it is no surprise that other languages have chosen not to name Good Friday good, but Long Friday. We are living a long Friday at the moment, just as others have done before us in different points in history, surrounded by the grief and of isolation and separation from our loved ones, even perhaps most especially in death. We fear not only death, but the sadness of deaths that feel irredeemable, like Jesus's. Death before time, death of struggled final breaths, death without the close presence of loved ones, death without the closure of rituals that hold our souls together when we can't do it ourselves. Today we are called to sit in the long hours, to hold the pain, to feel the separation, and to count the cost. The German pastor and theologian Bonhoeffer found himself alone in a prison cell when he'd been resisting the Nazis, and writing to his friends, he said, "There is nothing that can replace the absence of someone dear to us, and one should not even attempt to do so. One must simply hold out and endure it. At first that sounds very hard, but at the same time it is also a great comfort, for to the extent the emptiness truly remains unfilled, one remains connected to the other person through it. It is wrong to say that God fills the emptiness. God in no way fills it, but much more leaves it precisely unfilled, and thus helps to preserve, even in pain, the authentic relationship." Today, we remember that relationship is at the heart of God, and that death and isolation break his heart. That it was God incarnate who was isolated from his friends and who faced an unknown future alone. That it was God who endured the anguish and the grief of a hopeless place and the inevitable pain and suffering of death. Today we remember that God was also overwhelmed with the horror of death, and he came to show us that through his extravagant and costly love for us, things might indeed be different. God has now participated in the anguished cry of generations, the cry of hospital rooms, the cry of wars and concentration camps, the cry of every Golgotha experience there has ever been on our globe. My God, why have you forsaken me? God has wailed at God, whispered to God, worried at God. Where are you? Have you left me too? And the answer was yes. God is forsaken by God. Here the incarnate God lives the impossible. He dies without even the love of God. He takes on the very worst of human experiences possible. But because God is God forsaken, something changes. God goes even to the God forsaken place. God goes through death to hell and back again. And now there is nowhere that God is not. God transforms what it is to suffer because he suffered too, and so now that place of suffering is always a place where he is present. God transforms what it means to die because God died too, and now that is a place of hope where he is present. God experiences what it means to be alone because he experienced bitter isolation too, and so now even in those times there is love. God is present. So even Good Friday, the worst of days, the longest of days, is a day now that we can say is God's Friday.